I tried to film this on Friday. I just got so confused. It was just a bad day. I lost my diamond to my engagement ring, which I luckily found and they repaired it for me. Of all my jewelry that I've ever owned, my engagement ring is like my utmost favorite piece. So the day after, all right, I want to explain things. So over that weekend, my mom started getting a little bit better. And when I say better, I think it was mentally she was doing a little bit better. She seemed a little bit more with it. Whereas the week prior, she was really out of it, because she was on such a high dose of pain medication. She was on this pump. So like every 2 seconds you see her hitting this button. It didn't release medication every 2 seconds. She didn't know that. I don't think she knew it. I don't know. I don't even know if she knew that. But I think it released it like every 15 minutes. So they took her off the pain pump, which was kind of cool because, I was able to have conversations with her again. And, that was a big thing that was really upsetting me, just her on that pain medication. You could have conversations with her, but it was like limited. You'd be in the middle of talking to her and she would kind of just like drift off and go like fall asleep, So it's like, it was nice to have her just not so medicated at that point. She was able to communicate with me again, which was really nice. It really was. Fine. The next day after the day that we caught my brother in the safe was a day that I'm not very proud of. November 2nd, okay? We're on November 2nd. That day, my mom called me up in the morning. She was upset about something. I had to do some type of procedure, right? She had this thing in her arm and it wasn't giving her good dialysis treatments. So she was a little upset about that. I had my son home with me that day. I hadn't showered in like 3 days at this point. Mind you guys that weekend, I had to go there in the middle of the night. It was just like crazy. I planned on staying home, taking a shower, and just kind of like, taking like a little quote unquote break for myself, My mom ends up calling me and she tells me that they're having a physical therapist come in the room. And I was like, great. When I was on the phone with her, the doctor was actually in the room. So I was like, could you hold the doctor off? Because I want to be able to talk to him and I want to see the physical therapist and see what they say. The doctor said, yes, absolutely. He said he hold the physical therapist off. So I tell my mom, I'm like, I'm getting dressed right now, and I'm going to come right up there. So once again, I didn't take a shower. I know this is gross, but it's just like, that's how like much time I didn't have to do shit for myself. Just throw clothes on. I get my son dressed really quick. He was 3 years old at the time, so he's not like really good at listening at this point. And I run up to the hospital, right? So my son and I get out, and I just want to like kind of set this whole situation up. The way that the hospital was laid out, it was like there was two buildings. If I can find a picture, I'll show you guys. Okay, so we're basically looking at the front entrance of the hospital and the two large buildings. My mom was in the one to the left. And that's the parking garage right there to the left. Okay, so that's where you had to park your car. And then there's my little bus stop I used to hide out in and smoke cigarettes in, which you weren't supposed to do. And then you had to walk. You see this whole like canopy kind of thing that goes over. So you had to walk that whole way, get into the front door, and then get all the way back there to those buildings. And then I had to wait for the elevators and go up to the 12th floor. So it took you a good 10, 15 minutes just to get, into the hospital. And plus you needed a visitor's pass. So every time you went in, you had to go to the front desk, tell them what, floor you were on. Sometimes there was a line, and then you had to wait for the elevators, which was a whole nother nightmare. It was a pretty lengthy walk. So like just to get from your car to, the hospital room, it took you about 10 minutes. You had to get out of the car and during the day, that parking garage was filled all the way up. So you always had to park at the very top. So then now you have to walk all the way down. It was a trek to get into the hospital. And then you had to wait for the elevators, which were like, oh my God, the elevators in the hospital are just a nightmare. So my son and I are like rushing to the hospital, right? Park my car and we're coming through the parking garage. I'm holding my son's hand. There's all people coming out. It's a very busy hospital. So we start walking, right? And all of a sudden, my son's like, Mommy, Uncle Steven. And I look over, and there's my brother. He's on the phone with guess who? Who else would he be talking on the phone with? I don't even think he talks to anybody else. He's like walking. He's like, oh, like, happy. Big smile on his face. And he's like, ha ha ha, like this. He's holding this little notebook in his hand and a pen. Like walking out and he's all like, yeah. And my son's like, Uncle Steven. And my brother literally turns his head, looks at us, and just kept walking. Didn't even stop and say like, hey, how you guys doing? Nothing. There was no conversation. He just walked right past us like we didn't even exist. He looked right at us. I mean, he knew it was us. And I was just like, what the hell was that all about? Like, why are you carrying a notebook? Like, in my head, I'm thinking, is he like having secret meetings with the freaking social worker again? Like, what the hell's going on here? We get up in the hospital. My mom's nowhere to be found in the room. And I'm like, where's the physical therapist? What happened, Oh, okay. I find one of the nurses and I'm like, where's my mom? They had to do a sonogram because they thought she was having blood clots in her legs or something like that. I go down to the floor. I think it was the 8th floor where the sonograms were. I had this hospital like memorized like the back of my hand. I practically lived in this hospital. I drag my son down. We get down into the sonogram room. My mom seems like she's in better spirits that day. I was kind of like, Mom, what happened with physical therapist? Like, I rushed down here and you didn't even hold him off. Oh, he came already. Oh, it went good. I'm like standing there like, how come nobody called me and told me, oh, the physical therapist came? Like, I told her like I wanted to stay home that day and take a shower for once, and you didn't even have the courtesy to call me and just tell me like, oh, hey, the physical therapist came. Don't worry about rushing up here. I'm kind of annoyed with that, But I was trying to keep my cool. I didn't want to fight with my mom, and especially about my brother and his wife. But I had to ask, why was a douchebag Steven walking out with this notebook with this big grin on his face? All of a sudden, she turns to me. She goes, oh, he was going to help me with some of my bills. And I'm like, all right. I knew now at that point that my mom did her bills. I had brought her iPad to the hospital. She asked me to bring a couple of bills to the hospital from her mail that I picked up and brought there. I'm thinking, is she giving him access to her bank account right now? I almost felt like, this sounds so messed up. But I got to a point where I started to feel like, is my mom like in cahoots with these people? Like, is there something going on that maybe she's not telling me about now? Maybe she's telling them to do this stuff. I don't know. I really was just so confused at this point in time. I mean, while I was going through all this stuff and my brother and all this shady, shit going on, I was just confused. I just didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if they got her to sign the power of attorney forms, because the day before in the meeting, she admitted to me, like, why did I say that to him? He thinks he's going to be my power of attorney. I was completely confused and I got angry. I really did, because I'm like, why are you trusting this asshole? He's invading your privacy. You did your bills already. And why all of a sudden the sudden interest in wanting to help with your bills? Of all things in the world, that's what he wants to help with? Where was he, though, when she really needed help? Like when she was home and struggling, he was nowhere to be found. And I'm not kidding with you guys. They were at her house in the last few weeks of her life. And I'm not even exaggerating. They were at her house more in the last few weeks of her life than they were last 3 years of her life combined. It's just so weird. It's like all of a sudden she's not home and they're at her house all the time. And they're lying about it. I got angry with my mom. It was just everything. Everything kind of caught up with me in that moment. And I called my husband, and he kind of got me a little riled up because he was like, F Steven, and, all this other stuff. And I was like, you're right. Like, it is kind of messed up, because my mom was kind of doing this thing where she did that kind of pissed me off sometimes. If she didn't want to talk about something or deal with something, she would kind of like I'd be talking to her and she would be like talking to my son. Like she would use my son as like a way to like kind of ignore me. I was trying to ask her questions about everything, about the physical therapy and this and that. And I just got like pissed off. Like I got like very aggravated with her in that moment, because it was just everything. It was like the lack of sleep, the worrying, my brother and what he was doing, just everything caught up with me in that moment. And I was just like so aggravated. And I was like, you know what? I'm going home. I'm just going to go home. And she was like, well, why are you going home? And I'm like, because I just want to go home. It's not you, it's me. I just want to go home. I'm aggravated. I haven't showered. I haven't slept. I'm just aggravated. So I left the hospital that day, kind of in a hasty way. And I feel bad about it. Trust me, I do. I don't look back at it and regret it, because I feel like it's kind of understandable given the circumstances. And I mean, it was really starting to catch up on me. I was almost having like a mental breakdown at this point in time. Of course, later on, I felt guilty. guilty. And, I text her. That was the only night out of the 28 days she was there, whatever it was, that I didn't come up to the hospital. And I felt so guilty. And I'm like, I don't know how my brother does this, because he would go days without coming to the hospital. If they had something to do, like the daughter, Satan's daughter had a regatta race, whatever. Who the fuck joins a regatta team? I don't even know. I felt really guilty. I really did. I felt really, really guilty about it. Thankfully, some of her friends from her old job and my neighbor, one of her neighbors, who I call my neighbor because I live next door to her for the better portion of my life, went up and saw her. So at least I felt like, all right, she wasn't sitting there alone all night, thank God. But, things happen. And, I look back at it like, yeah, I was wrong that day. I was really wrong. But I'm not going to dwell on it because it was just the stress of the situation. I think anybody in my situation would have, maybe reacted the same way, if not worse. Friday comes, okay? This was something that was really weird. I got a phone call from this woman who was the palliative care director. I had never met this woman. At least I don't think I did. I don't think she was one of the women who was in the meeting that day. She called me up, right? And we got into this whole conversation, and she was urging me to get a lawyer to come down to the hospital. My mom was getting a procedure done that day, and I got stuck on the phone with this woman. We had this long conversation. We talked about where my mom was at medically. Her cancer had metastasized and things weren't looking good, and that my mom really needed to get her affairs in order. But here was the thing. This woman knew about my brother and Satan, and she knew that my mom was very worried about them and what they were doing. This woman was urging me very strongly to get my mom to sign power of attorney over to me because of my brother and his wife. And so it was this whole big long conversation, but she's like, really, like, you need to get on this, like, ASAP. She told me that she had sat down with my mom that day. All right, it was that Friday, November 4th, when she called me. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, this is so weird, How does this woman know all this? She told me that she sat down with my mom and they had a whole conversation about it that day. So she was telling me that, she was sincerely urging me to get my mom to get a power of attorney signed over to me because she was very concerned about my brother and his wife. So I go to the hospital. I don't know if it was the next day or whatever. And I asked my mom about it. And I was like, Mom, like, why did this lady call me? Did you talk to her? My mom's like, no, I didn't talk to her. I'm like, Mom, how would this lady know this whole story? To this day, I don't know if my mom was just in denial. I don't know. I don't know if she forgot. I mean, this woman wasn't lying. She told me she sat down with my mom and had this whole conversation with her. And I was on the phone for like an hour and a half with this lady. She didn't just pull this out of the air. She had to have talked to my mom. My mom, and I started to realize this in the last couple of weeks, I think my mom's biggest fear in life and dying was that me and my brother weren't going to talk to one another. So she was doing everything in her power to kind of avoid that from happening. At the same time, she would tell me things, and you guys are going to hear about it in a second. My mom would tell me these things, and I knew there was a reason she was telling me these things. And it was almost as a way to warn me. But I felt like my mom having that woman call me and then denying it was kind of her way of like keeping her hands clean. I don't know. I mean, that's how I feel. I feel like my mom couldn't exactly find the right words to say as I was filming this. But I think what I wanted to say is that my mom didn't want to die knowing that she was the one who drove a wedge further in between my brother and I. And so she kind of just denied that conversation with this woman so that, she didn't have to take the guilt of feeling like the bad guy. And you guys heard her in the last video saying that she wants to tell him why. And it really wasn't personal against my brother. I kept always putting the blame on Satan. I was always like, it's not him, it's Satan. You could hear me saying it in that recording. I'm like, it's not him, it's her. I felt like my brother was this innocent victim. He was brainwashed. He was being pushed by his wife. But you know what? He had a choice in all of this. Every time he chose to go with her and do these things. I don't feel bad anymore. Yeah, oh, you're brainwashed. I don't feel bad. You're not a victim. You're an accomplice. That's how I look at it now, because your moral compass is still somewhere in there. The Steven I knew, he still exists somewhere. And so my mom, she didn't want to add fuel to the fire. So, she would kind of avoid things sometimes. And I think that's what she was doing when she kind of denied talking to this woman, which obviously she had to talk to this woman. How would the woman have even got my phone number or knew my name or how to call me? And then to tell me, get an attorney down here or something to get a power of attorney and get my mom's will in order. My mom had to have told her. There's just no other way. So that day I go down. She had this little procedure done. My aunts ended up going down to the hospital. All my aunts, all three of them, my mom's sisters. So they were there while she was getting the procedure. I ended up showing up after they left. So I'm at the hospital that night. My mom's out of the procedure. She seems like she's doing a little bit better, This new nurse came in, right? And she was taking my mom's blood pressure and talking, doing all the vitals and giving her medications and whatever. She's just making small talk with my mom. And she starts asking my mom these questions. And one of the questions, she was like, oh, do you have kids? And my mom's like, yeah. She's like, me and I'm married and whatever. My mom was like, yeah, I have a son too. And she's like, oh, is your son married? And me and my mom just kind of looked at each other and we laughed. And my mom was like, I'm not really crazy about my son's wife. And the nurse was like, oh, why is that? And we were kind of explaining it to her. We didn't go into full detail, but we were just like, she's annoying. She's just loud and controlling and all this other shit, right? And all of a sudden, my mom turns to me and she goes, Leanna, we got to stop doing that. And I'm like, what do you mean, doing what? She goes, you know my tax lady, Janet, or whatever her name is? And I'm like, yeah. When everything was going down at first, around my brother's wedding and all this fighting started, my mom went to go get her taxes done that year. And she was telling the accountant how my brother was getting married and she can't stand the girl that my brother's getting married to, right? It ends up, Satan was at the hospital talking about taxes. Why? I don't know. It was November. Who's talking about taxes in November? I don't know. But they were always bringing up all these conversations about bills and money and all this. Because that's all Satan does. It's all she talks about is money. Satan all of a sudden said to my mom, oh, yeah, my tax lady, Janet. And my mom's like, Janet who? And she's like, oh, Janet, whatever her last name is. And my mom's like, oh, that's who does my taxes. And when my mom told me this, I was like, Ma, that sounds a little suspicious, especially given the fact that my mom had a magnet on her fridge that had the lady's name on it. And I'm like, they probably told you that just so they could be like, oh, yeah, we'll take care of your taxes, too. We'll just take care of all your financial stuff. I felt like they were lying. I was like, come on, what's the chances that this woman is her accountant, too? What are the chances? It's like a snowball's chance in hell that that's possible. But it ends up it actually was. That was probably one time she wasn't lying. Because she always did this, Satan. This was her thing. She always had this, I know somebody that knows you thing. And to me, that even in the hospital, oh, I know nurses there. I know an anesthesiologist. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I know nurses there. I know an anesthesiologist. He's going to come to you. He's going to take care of you. Nobody ever showed up that knew her. I think she thinks these people are her friends, but they're really her clients because she sells insurance. She's a fucking shady-ass insurance saleswoman. I think these people are clients and she just calls them her friends. I don't think she really knows them. The anesthesiologist was probably like, yeah, I have nothing better to do but visit my insurance sales lady's mother-in-law. She was probably so pissed off when she realized that I actually had a friend who was not only a nurse there, but a nurse on my mom's unit and was caring for my mom. She was probably so mad that I had a connection at the hospital. Later that night, my mom tells me this other thing that was really, really weird. She goes, Lee, I got to tell you something else. And I'm like, what? You know what else Satan said? I'm like, what? Satan told me that she won this thing called the Nest in a contest. And I'm listening yeah, the Nest. She's like, you know what that is? I'm like, yeah, it's one of those smart thermostats that you could control your heat and air conditioning and stuff from home. So she goes, yeah, she told me she won it in a contest and that she wants to give it to me. And I'm thinking, that's really weird. That thing's pretty expensive, it's a $250 item. And I'm like, she just wants to give it to you? So my mom's like, yeah, she's like, she told me that she doesn't need it and she's going to give it to me so that I could control the heat from the hospital of my house. And I'm thinking not that she didn't need it. She had a thermostat that had a program on it that, when it went on and, at a certain time and went off at a certain time and whatever. I was like, I don't know, Mom. Like, she's probably just talking shit. This is what this girl does. She lies about everything. Like, you can't believe a goddamn word that this girl says. Then my mom stops me and she goes, well, there was something else that was really weird about it. And I said, yeah, what? And she goes, well, she told me that it also came with a camera. I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, it comes with a little security camera. And she told me she was going to give me that too. And I'm like, what? I'm like, that sounds a little weird, Mom. She's going to give you a camera? So my mom's like, yeah. She's like, I don't know. I don't feel comfortable about that. She was like, I don't mind taking the thermostat thing, but I don't want a camera in my house. Like, that sounds a little bit weird, but I'm like, whatever. She's such a liar, this girl, that it's like really hard to believe anything that she says. Here's the problem. My mom didn't have the balls to like say no to this girl. So I was like, I don't know, Mom. Like, this sounds so weird. I just kind of wrote it off. And it was eating away at me the whole night because I was like, why? Like, why is this woman just giving away, succubus, just giving away $550 worth of merchandise to my mom? All of a sudden, you're going to give my mom, here you go, here's $500 worth of merchandise. Why? Why are you concerned about my mom's thermostat? I can't think of a good reason why. Why all of a sudden are you like, oh, I got this nest and I just want to give it to you while you're in the hospital? It just didn't make any sense to me. Like, in my head, I was probably like, this is another Satan bullshit story because that's all she does is talk shit all the time. So I was like, whatever, right? All right, I'm going to end this video here and I'm going to pick this up in the next one.